Hi, and welcome to the No Snark Zone. My name is Jen Frankel. We're talking today with Michelle Wells, an author and a composer, and we'll be talking a little bit about the creative process and exactly what it means and how you can go about being creative. Michelle, are you there?
Yes,
Hi, it's great to have you with us today.
great to be here.
Now, I just wanted to start off by reading a bit that you sent me in an email before we were setting up this interview. You said, I think I can clarify exactly what I learned in university. 20th century music is a form of oral mathematics in which the end goal is to be more interesting than moving. The best 20th century music requires repeated listening to be fully appreciated, because these mathematical relationships must be consciously recognized and analyzed. You must create 20th century music because you live in the 20th century. Anything else is unacceptable. The moral: never study anything creative in university. Okay, I love this. Yes, there's a real disconnect when you're studying something artistic, especially if you're interested in the arts and you go into trying to study something artistic because you want to learn more about how to do it. Um, there's always a question of what you can actually teach in terms of art and what you actually start off with. Is that kind of a fair way to characterize it?
Yeah, I was totally unprepared. I went in with a set of assumptions that I just assumed were shared by the creative people who were teaching,
Right.
and that proved to be not at all the case.
What kind of
Uh,
things did you go in thinking you were gonna find?
I thought that it was a given that you created art to express. Uh, I thought that expressive context was a given. And I learned that was not the assumption that a lot of them seem to have. And um, what I didn't add to that was that actually by my final year of university, um, I found a really, really good prof who actually seemed to understand where I was coming from. What he said was, what you're trying to do is not just noodling around. He said, I get that. And I was like, duh, and yet this had not been the context of what had been before, but I had no idea. And, it was just like I would approach it so differently if I was trying to teach it. I would be like, first of all, you have to find um, harmonic, expression that works for you, among the sounds of the past and present, and whatever speaks your voice in that, then you can work on making that better and better. You can work on the techniques of making that better and better. And instead, they did it the opposite. It was completely backwards. They just imposed a certain aesthetic. They said you have to write dissonant. It just you have no option.
Right. So it was less
And
about self-expression and more about expressing the current state of music.
yeah, if it was even about expressing anything at all, I mean, it just seemed to be about a bunch of ideas about these oral mathematical relationships.
Now, did you actually see with other people in your program, were they approaching the whole creative process differently from you?
Yeah, they just went along with whatever, most of them. I mean, yeah, I think basically all of them, they just went along with what was being taught and imposed, and no one ever encouraged us to try and find our own voices. I mean, and the thought that any of us might actually have our own voices was also not considered. So all the rest just went along, and I felt like I basically I couldn't do this.
Right.
That I wasn't meant to do this.
And that was composing itself, not just being in the program, or?
Yeah, composing itself. I mean, I was told that what I was interested in doing was just irrelevant, and everybody else seemed to go along with that.
When you were talking about the idea that you weren't just noodling, is that a composing method that was being encouraged, or what?
Oh no, no, no. I think noodling is like, sitting and improvising or whatever. That's completely different. Like what he meant was that I wasn't just following what I was told to do.
Right.
That I was actually, I wasn't just putting things together and trying to please the prof or, whatever. That I was actually trying to express myself, and that's what he got.
It's sad that that would almost be something that was that sounds like it was a detriment to your career as a composer at university. That it was not just
Oh,
being not encouraged, but it wasn't being recognized as a valuable contribution.
it took me years and years and years to try to overcome that, and only just recently with this piece that I've recently written have I even begun to come upon a method that I can use that actually works for me, because the methods that we were taught in university were just ass backwards. I mean, it was like, like I likened it in one email to starting with in writing, to starting with your theme, and working backwards.
Right.
But the way I like to write is to start with the story and then try and divide and tease out the theme from that.
Right.
So yeah, it was a terrible, terrible detriment to whatever creative impulses that I had, and it basically made me feel like this wasn't my thing, and I couldn't do it, and that also combined with the learning disability I now I think have discovered that I have with regard to notation, that made it difficult even to
Okay.
work with notation. But that aside, I mean that shouldn't have been such a huge obstacle, but the way the way they were teaching it, it just totally was. So I mean, when I was younger, my original impulse was actually to study music in community college.
Okay.
I thought that was not a bad idea. It's what I wanted to do, but it was insisted that I go to university.
And that was because it would be a more intellectual exercise for you instead of just a basic college course. It's interesting because we both spent some time in London, Ontario, and at Fanshawe College there, I know a lot of people go to the music program there, and it's largely engineering program. It's like it's about production of music, but a lot of the people who come out of that program end up being pretty fine composers, I would say. Maybe their creative juices aren't being tapped as much, or stoppered, I guess, not tapped.
Yeah, there isn't that aesthetic just imposed on them. So I think, I mean, I don't know, but I think it might have been a better way for me to go, because they just didn't have the kind of strictures that were aesthetically imposed on those of us who went to university.
Right. You mentioned a piece that you've just been finishing, and I wanted to talk about that. So, can you just let us know what it was that you were actually composing recently?
Well, we had a choir that was interested in I belong to a small composers collective here where I live, and uh, we had a choir from Kingston who was interested in getting a piece from each of us um, to perform at our next concert. So
Oh, neat.
uh, for the first time in my life, I was writing for choir, and I wasn't sure if I could do it, but yeah, it turns out they can do it fine, and they really enjoy it, and I composed the words for it as well, so
That's
it turned
great.
out okay.
So it's in is it in four parts or?
It's two parts actually, just soprano, alto, and piano.
Oh, neat. And you'll get to hear this yourself then.
Oh yes, yeah. There's a concert in June. And I get to hear it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So your process, I guess, was you said that you've actually been you actually were just starting to discover a process that works for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is because I never really developed one before, because the aesthetic I was trying to work in before and the techniques we were taught were so antithetical to anything I actually wanted to create,
Right.
that I didn't know how to write something I really liked. I didn't know really how to go about it. So I had to try and just kind of teach myself. And I think I actually learned a lot from the novel that I've been working on for the last 15 years or so. Um,
That sounds about right.
what's that?
No, novels take a hell of a lot longer than people think they
Oh,
will, especially first novels.
yeah, no, especially first ones, exactly. So from that, I think I learned how to work with something that's long form, like a larger piece. And like my choir piece is 5 minutes, so that's fairly long.
Right.
And so I just, the method I devised is the same one I used to write. It's like driving at night, that you don't know where you can't see where you're going, you
Right.
know, uh, right at the end of the road, but you can see as far as your headlights take you. And then as far as they take you after that. So in terms of the novel, that basically meant a scene at a time, building it a scene at a time, and trusting that those scenes would take me to the end of the story that my unconscious had in mind. And with this piece, it basically meant a few bars at a time, and consciously trying to maintain a consistent harmonic language.
Which I guess
And
is like staying on the road.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like, you kind of know when you go off the road, you kind of, because it kind of hits a dead end, and then you have to start from where you left off. And,
Right.
so that technique actually, I thought, worked for me really well with the piece. I'm very pleased with the structure and the momentum and, all that kind of thing. So I think this cross disciplinary experience kind of actually helped me with that.
Oh, that's great. So you think you'll actually be able to take what you learned from the music back to the novel again?
That is a good question.
I guess that'll be something you'll have to figure out.
Yeah, no, I'm really struggling with the novel right now, and it's like I just don't have the tools to try and fix where it's at right now. But I'm going to have to try and think about that. What can I learn? Because I was so happy I actually finished the piece, right? It's like, yes, it's done. Oh, that's the first thing I finished. I don't know how long, so yeah.
Well, I really love the analogy of the driving at night though, because usually when you're going somewhere, if you're going somewhere you've never been before, you might actually have a map, and it might be like a crappy little hand drawn map on the back of a napkin, or it might be a GPS, but despite the fact that you have an idea of where the turns are going to be, you have no idea what the landscape is going to look like when you get there. And even if you're able to kind of see around you when you get to the place, it's not going to be what you expected from like a two-dimensional representation on a map.
Yeah, that's definitely part of the journey, that it affects the destination to some extent. Yeah, especially with writing, because the way I work is a lot different from how some writers work, in that they plot out the plot and they know where it's going to end up.
Right.
And the way I worked was different. That I
Did you have any idea where you were going to, like how your ending was going to come together?
only the most general, like really, really most general.
I do know writers who work very methodically, and every single scene is planned out, and they know exactly where the scene is going to start and stop, and that always seems to me to stop the possibility of fortuitous accidents, and also for the kind of amazing things you come up with if you let the characters just carry themselves. We were talking a little bit before we started taping about the idea of using your imagination and actually sort of allowing the characters to have the scene. Like you put them in the scene, and then you see what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
Does that actually carry over? Is there an application of that in your music?
I guess not specifically like that, but yeah, it's harder to kind of analogize from that actually.
Right.
So music is sort of more intuitive. Like you're not, for me anyway. I'm not thinking as much. You know, I'm just letting the sounds inform me, sort of. So
Right. So when you find a theme or something along the way, like when you find a like a melody or something, then does that just become something that can recur because you've created it, or how does that work?
you know, most composers. Well, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of them work extremely consciously that way. They sit down, they come up with themes, and then they will come up with variations.
Right.
And then they will figure out how they want to combine and develop those variations and what they want to do with the motives and, you know, that kind of thing.
So they would actually sit down and say, "Okay, here's my melody, and here's a minor version of the melody for a sad section." And then they would
Well, not
actually
so much that, but like the various transpositions and, you know,
right.
I forget all the terms, but, you know, expansions and diminutions and, you know, all these different things that these permutations you can do.
Yeah, it really
Um,
does start to sound more mathematical than intuitive.
oh, yeah, completely. And especially if you sit down and work it all out beforehand, before you actually sit and do the piece, let alone listen to it,
Right.
right? And some people really pride themselves about working away from the piano.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but, you know, I can't do it without it. I can't feel like I'm making myself sound like a really bad composer. And
No,
I
no,
can't,
just obviously like well, it's interesting because whenever you're talking about writing with people, um, everyone wants to learn how to do it if they're not if they don't feel like they're writing easily. They want to know what you do, how you work it out, how you approach things. I was talking to another writer about just how nice it is to kind of write ahead a little bit. If you're working on something and you get an idea for something that happens way down the road, it's nice to kind of put a few sentences or a scene together. And then when you get to that point in the book, you're not starting with a totally blank page. So it just psychologically, it just helps you out a little bit, I think. And
yeah,
I've never been good at planning everything out meticulously because I don't find that it feels organic enough for me. I don't feel that the people talk to me, and I don't feel the situations are real when I try to plan things out too carefully.
yeah, the way I blended conscious and unconscious processes in this last piece is that I made a conscious effort to be true to the basic harmony that I'd set out, like the basic chord, if you like, that I'd set out. So I really sort of always was striving towards that.
Right.
But really, what I did was just knock it out, like from section to section, just play through and play through and play through until I finally found something that really sounded like it went with the section before, and just build from that. And now that the whole thing is done, I feel like I could look at it and I could do a musical analysis of it, and it would be quite consistent.
Right.
You know, it's basically the same stuff developed into all those permutations that they teach you to do ahead of time in
Right.
university, which sucks all the expression out of it,
Would
basically, you
you
know.
say that by doing it that way, it's just less fun for you, or is it just not the way your mind works?
Both. I don't think I really could. And I would hate every second, which has in the past has certainly happened. But
Yeah.
it seems to me, you know, now I talk about it, it's almost like cheating to work that way.
To
You know,
plan it out beforehand.
yeah, to have like that much, you know, to 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 work it out that much ahead of time, it just seems like, I don't know, like cheating, like cheating. You know, I can't think of a good analogy, but
No, I actually
you
know
know,
what you mean though, because it always feels
yeah,
like that when somebody, because there's a lot of, especially in screenwriting, there's a lot of reverse engineering going on. It's you take
yeah,
a really a successful film and you figure out exactly where everything happens emotionally. And then you write a carbon copy with your own characters and your own situations, but you use all the underlying emotional beats from the famous script. It
Yeah.
always seems though when you do that, there's that element of magic that's just not there. There's an element of inspiration that doesn't seem to have translated from the reverse engineered piece.
Exactly. It's that element of expression that's missing. And I have studied aesthetics as well. And in order to achieve aesthetic experience from a piece of art, there's an emotional component, but
Yeah.
then above and beyond that, there's that aesthetic experience. And I think if you're just not feeling it when you're creating it, then nobody, who takes it in is going to be feeling it either.
Yeah, you
So
kind of feel that. And it's funny because I think that that might be why some so-called bad art speaks to people so much because it's been done by somebody who's really enthusiastic. So it might not be incredibly educated when you go into it. The person who's doing it might not be the most aware of all the trends that they're working in or might not be the most experienced person emotionally or in terms of life experience, but they have a love of what they're doing that translates and that touches people.
that's not as sophisticated.
Yeah, it might. Yeah, and maybe what's happening in those classes that you, that you obviously didn't enjoy was they're trading enthusiasm for sophistication, but they're losing something essential by doing it.
Well, this is what comes to what I think is the problem with a lot of the arts these days is the just doing stuff for each other.
Right.
Uh, like high art that only a select few will understand, and then your job is done because the select few love it, and what anybody else thinks does not matter.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like anybody doing anything else will be accused of pandering to the masses, but it's actually the complete opposite. When you have genuine expression, you're pandering to no one. you
Right.
know
Yeah.
so I think it's complete selling out when these high aesthetic pieces are just done for the small group of elites that approve of them.
Right.
That's not. I mean, if I ran a music department somewhere, I would do it so differently than is being done in a lot of these places. Like
Okay, that was actually my final question. How would
yeah,
you go about um, what kind of students? I guess because I'm sure if you opened a music school, you're gonna get a whole range of kinds of musicians, kinds of thinkers, kinds of people. How would you teach music?
it's even the same in the performing aspect of music. You get a lot of performers I find technically excellent, and they're not putting anything into it.
Right.
They're just going through the motions. So I think ideally, I think that has to change in every aspect. So how I would teach, I think I would really encourage people to take a broad historical approach and truly find their own voice. Doesn't matter from what era. Could be 20th century, could be 21st, could be way before that. Doesn't matter. And so to have that exposure, and I would have um, a few lectures on aesthetics as well,
Right.
because that's just not touched. And I think that's important, the philosophical component.
Right.
So basically, I would have a bunch of people that were forced to question, why do I want to do this? And what am I trying to say? And what do I have to say? And that those questions are actively suppressed in my experience in
Right.
university, you know. So that would be my end goal with my students is to have them ask those questions.
How much of it do you think is just ego playing into it that people don't want to have anybody questioning what's going on?
Oh, so much. Just totally. If you think about it, it's that way throughout a lot of life. There's not a lot of authenticity in life.
We talk about like fan fiction, I guess, a lot. That there's some amazing stuff being written, not necessarily technically good writing, but very passionate writing that really connects to readers. Written by people that aren't professional writers by any means, but who really care about the characters they're writing about.
Yeah, exactly. I think so long as they don't underdistance and put themselves too closely
Right.
in this, as long as they have that perspective on it, from someone else's point of view, then absolutely, I can see that and how they would be so like this goes into the discussion we were having before about literary versus genre
Right.
and how that's sort of like that too.
Yeah, and I'd actually love to leave that for another time. I'd love to have you back and talk about that. Will you come back and talk about that at some point?
Oh yeah.
Okay, sounds
Yeah.
great. Okay, just
I
wrapping it up.
here in my own place. I don't mind coming back at all.
Isn't Skype wonderful? Yeah, no, it was great talking to you, and yeah, I really hope that at some point you either get to open a school to teach people music, or you just get to talk about it more, and potentially somebody will get the idea that it's a more fun to go into music um, with the inspiration instead of with the back engineering mechanical side of it.
I just hope I get to make more music
Yeah, I do
and,
too.
and talk about authenticity too.
I'll be looking forward to hearing your piece. It's June that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll have you back in a couple of months, and we'll talk about how things are going for that.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been Jen Frankel for the No Snark Zone with Michelle Wells, composer and author. If you'd like to find out more, please visit us at www.jenfrankel.com or on YouTube.